Good evening. Today is Thursday, the 6th of February, 2025. We're sitting at 1800 and Southern African Standard Time. It is time for Abaxoxi, the storytellers. Abaxoxi is a recorded interview conversation initiated to amplify the lived experiences, insights, perspectives, and thought leadership of African women in the world of work. The word Abaxoxi, pronounced Abaxoxi, is derived from the isiZulu word meaning xoxa, to chat. In our storytelling format, we are hoping to have conversations with our guests, and these guests represent an intergenerational, intercultural, multi-talented, and multidisciplinary perspective of leadership. And with them, we will explore the voice of African women in politics, academia, STEM, business, sports, and the arts, to name just a few. Abaxoxi has been launched this year, particularly to focus on a conversation about storytelling. While we talk about amplifying the voices of African women, part of what we'd like to do is to start to debunk some of the narratives that exist and persist about who we are, how we show up, what inspires us, and what drives us. Through this conversation, we're hoping to change your current and future outlook, perspective, and lens of what it looks like and feels like to be an African woman in business today. Joining me this afternoon is the amazing Clara Pinkrah-Sam. And I must tell you, the very first time I had a conversation with her, I walked away with a girl crush. I was having a girl crush because wow, wow, wow. I think for me, I always say that I love to introduce people, not just based on what their CV says, and these are the most illustrious CVs that you can think of, but also based on my personal first sense when I engage with them. Let me tell you what I thought. I thought, wow, conscious grace. Conscious grace because there is a quietness about Clara that just belies the depth of intuitive thinking, presence, and just awareness. And almost like she walks around with this sense of, I've been there, it's okay, I've done that, it's okay, take your time. So Clara, by way of formal introduction, is known as a multipotentialite. And I love that as well. I think that drew me to her, this idea that gives us liberty and freedom to walk into this reality that we are not just one skill, we are not just one talent. And being able to explore the full potential of who we represent as African women is much more possible because other women have gone before us and they're doing it boldly and successfully. She is an award-winning she's a Ghanaian, sorry, award-winning fashion designer and the founder of Clatural. Oh my goodness, go to wearclateral.com. You will not be, I'm looking for the English word, it's gone, Mara. You will love yourself for having made that decision because not only is she producing the most amazing garments, she's also really focusing on being an ethical and sustainable fashion brand. This is relevant for me, totally relevant in an era where, as many Africans, we get told about what environmental social governance looks like. The ability for us to frame and interact with the world on our terms around what it translates to in our lived experiences, our lives, and also the lives of those who are totally impacted by the changes that are happening, not just from a climate perspective, not just from an environment perspective, but practically also from an economic perspective. She has got a world of experience, and me hearing that this woman that we're going to speak to this afternoon is a pharmacist. She's going to tell us if she still dabbles in those. She's got experience working in organizations such as the World Bank, UNDP, private and public sector. And she's moved out of that quite comfortably to go into the world of fashion. My daughter, from the time she was a young baby, always said to us she wants to go into fashion. She's doing her Form 5 this year, going to IB, but she knows that what she wants to do in this world has got to do with fashion. And to have people who are in the industry making moves, but are also able to speak a language of global enterprise in terms of understanding some of the nuances that shape how people will be buying, what people are looking for, what we should be considering, not only as we produce, but also as we consume, makes her a woman worth listening to today. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the founder, chief director, chief, I don't know what to call it. I think chief doesn't even quite capture it. But the energy, the brains behind Wear Clatural is Clara Pinkrah-Sam, who runs an opulence boutique. I love that idea of opulence. There's so many things. You can see I'm introducing you, not just with aesthetic, this is what it is, but I'm telling you how it's making me feel being in this position of introducing this, right? With two locations in New York City. And I just think that the ability to take what we have, what we do, how we do it, and be recognized globally is for me and is an exciting perspective and lens. And I think it is something a lot more of us should be doing around the brands that we're creating on the African continent. Mother, Rotarian. I always end up saying Rotaritarian, but it's Rotarian, and charter president of the Rotary Club of Accra in Ghana. It is my great pleasure to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, Clara Pinkrah-Sam. Welcome, Clara.
Thank you, Rehema. That was an enormous introduction. I was thinking you were introducing somebody else.
That's you. That's you. That's you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure
Welcome,
to be
welcome,
here.
welcome. I am so honored. I am so honored that you said yes, that you are prepared to come into this conversation, that you're ready to just have an engagement around storytelling, around narrative. It's a passion of mine, but I know it's one that, when people hear storytelling, I often hear, what are you talking about? What place does storytelling have in the world of work? That's something that you do after hours with your friends. Why are you raising the profile of storytelling? And so for you to get it in terms of the role that stories play, but also being willing to share your story and how this intersects and interacts with life is such an honor for me to have you here. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm dying to get
Thank
your
you for
voice.
having me. It's
Thank
a
you. I'm
pleasure to be
dying to
here.
have your voice. I'm excited. I'm excited. You know, I've been saying that every time I've spoken to you. I'm like, I should have recorded that one. So I'm glad to be doing this one on record. Clara, storytelling, what it means for you. I'm going to frame it a little bit better. I guess the question that I have is I became conscious of stories and how they made me feel very young age, and it's totally influenced my outlook on life. I'm curious about the role the stories have played and shaped for you. And I'd like to take you back to your childhood, and to explore and walk a journey with you as you share with us. Perhaps as you grew up, what was the world saying about what was possible? And how did this shape how you imagined what the world would be for a grown-up Clara?
Thank you once again, Rehema. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Growing up as an African child, storytelling is part of our culture. I think that every African child has a moment with either their mother or their grandmother or even an auntie telling them a story about how their family history is, an encounter at a farm, or where once upon a time they probably were chased by ghosts or some kind. So yes, storytelling is actually embedded in our culture as Africans. And growing up, you hear it every day. I mean, in Ghana, in the evenings after dinner, you gather around whether the fireside or the living room, and you are told stories, rich stories of your heritage. And so, yes, you grow up hearing what it is to be like when you grow up in terms of responsibility. You see people and how they behave as grown-ups. And our storytelling was embedded with wisdom, traditional wisdom, ethical and moral senses that shaped our lives as children. And that is part of our culture as Africans. So growing up with storytelling I envisaged a life that was ready to serve. I envisaged a life, a motherly role that I was going to play. I envisaged being married and having about 4 children, maybe because my mother had 4. And one thing for sure was I envisaged an adult who was going to influence the world in a positive way. And I think that that is the importance of storytelling right from my childhood and how it affected my imagination of what life has to be when I grow up.
Wow, that's so significant for me because you've already, off the bat, started speaking about some of the nuances of being human, that in an era where we perhaps engage digitally are not necessarily brought to the fore consciously, in the way that you have. Telling us about storytelling being ritual and practice, and therefore it is something that you deliberately set out to do. There's an intentionality around it. You'll sit around the fireplace, but it wasn't incidental. It was a curated experience, and I love connecting it back to perhaps African practice, that in the world of work we don't necessarily draw that parallel around the similarities of the things that we do, or the translatability of our shared cultural practices and what they mean for how we do things and how we relate with each other and create and foster understanding. So for telling us that it was ritual and practice, that you did. So ritual tells me that was something that you did not just once, it was a frequent occurrence, and in fact expected as part of a rite of growing up. The idea that stories with that ability to share model values, right? That stands out because values are not something that you just walk into a room and you apply. They're embedded in what you, and they're informed by what you've consumed. They are informed by how those values were communicated and what they represented. I always tell people I can tell you a Cinderella story 5 times and I can make different people the villains just in terms of how I'm choosing to not only narrate it, but also what I'm emphasizing and what coding I'm wanting to share with you so that it lands in the manner that it does. So reminding us that, by engaging ritualistically, and that also tells me that there's a format and way of introducing these things. They don't just come. It tells you there's a lot more thought, there's a lot more thinking around stories. It's not just I'm sitting, but there's actually a human practice of thinking in a systemic way of engaging with narrative, which is why it allows things to be a lot more memorable. It allows things to become part of your muscle and memory of how you do things. And also informing us around, what is acceptable, acceptability, ethical wisdom. I love that. The idea that stories, the once upon a time, come with morals, right? And so I remember growing up, besides, and I laughed when you said that the stories would talk about ghosts because we had those as well. And I think across the continent, we all did. And I know I grew up listening to Anansi and other local folklore, which have got even if the naming convention was slightly different, the moral message was consistent. And I think that's powerful because it tells us that across generations, across cultures, there is an ability to influence moral coding around what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable, and what's not acceptable. And we know that this changes and shifts depending on the environment that we're in. I'm going to latch on the last piece that you talked about, which is about shaping who you would be ready to serve. That's a very woman narrative, actually. And I'd love to unpack it just a little bit more because it speaks to perhaps the practices at home, the expectations of how you would show up and where you would be, the mothering, the intention. And I guess I say this genetic coding. Physically, I was designed to have a child. So, and it's just other influences that would shape whether or not I exercise that right. But the stories that you're saying that you were told shaped your perspective and lens of what is normal. So there's a natural thing. And some of our discomfort or even ease with spaces come across based on our experience of our intended and intentional normal. You knew that as an adult you'd influence the world. What gave you that idea? What made you think that you, Clara, would be that person? What existed in the narratives of your lived reality that shaped that as a possibility? Either existed was or was absent.
I will say that it's an intuitive belief. I had a mother who was very strong. I had a father was very influential. I do not come from um, an extremely rich family, but I come from a comfortable family with a lot of ethics. I saw how my mother and my parents would go the extra mile to support the needy in society. I saw how they would go the extra mile to feed extra mouth that we had no relations with. And for me, that was the basis of what influence and positivity is in life. And so as a child, it was not even thinking I was going to go international, but my influence, I knew was going to go beyond my household. And for me, that is a positive influence right there. It's one step at a time. I had seen other families where what they would eat was difficult. I had seen families who were struggling, and I saw how my parents would reach out and help such families. I saw how my parents would reach out even to the missionaries, Roman fathers and Roman sisters, and literally adopted some of them. So I saw the positivity and the potential of influencing even in your neighborhood. So growing up, I just knew that for me, that was an exemplary life of what I have to be. And every child dreams of being more than who their mother and their father are. And so I knew very early that by extension, if my parents were touching 10 homes, I could do like 50 or 60. And it all came from seeing what was being done, experiencing it, and also being told. As a child, I was quite curious and I would ask questions. Why this? Why that? I remember when my mom would wrap some clothes and ask that you go and deliver to this person. I would ask her, these are your clothes. So why are you giving them out to her? Then she would take her time and explain that they need it. And sometimes I remember she would ask permission from me to take some clothes of mine because she's seen a child who does not have it and things that I do not have much need of it. And as a child, she needed your permission because you can't just take your child's, toy or outfit and give it out. So yes, those were all very nice ways of inculcating us motherhood, empathy, and everything else, everything, good values in a way that made me see that definitely I needed to, and I was sure that I was going to step outside of my comfort zone, out of my household, and touch the lives of many.
What was normal um, shaped what you're doing today. What was normal was that uh, this consciousness that I exist, but I don't, and I exist, I am privileged. Not everybody exists in the same way that I do. I think for me, illuminates something around how your upbringing shapes your perspective and the choices that you make. So what we don't often hear about, and I always lament this, is the narrative of middle income Africans living comfortably on this continent. It's almost like to be an African, you must hide the fact that things were okay in your family. You must hide the fact that you had access. And I think there's an important narrative to be told about Africans being successful in whatever environments that they were in, and not being a consequence of either colonial input or just our history didn't start with colonialism. And I think that's a very important thing to say, that we had cultural settings, we had social settings, we had economic settings that were just defined by history, and colonialism was actually just a portion of that. So bringing in the identity of a middle income or middle class African and the kind of ideologies that existed or exist and continue to persist or that have shaped a particular, I wouldn't just say class of people, but a particular economic, I guess class would be the only word I will use right now, class of people on this continent. And rather than shying away from that as a reality, wanting to embrace that, because we are sitting years later, I'm looking at it and saying economically, we have the greatest number on this continent of Africans moving into middle income, and again having the opportunity to benefit from what this continent has to offer. What you're telling me from your story is that even as you sit in an environment and you are sitting with privilege, comfort, your consciousness of the fact that it is not that case for you, for your entire environment, means that there is a certain level of responsibility. This is the coding that I'm talking about. This is narrative that I'm hearing coming up from you, sitting back and saying, I'm East African. So I'll say not yet uhuru, not yet freedom. But I think that appreciating that we are a construct of our broader community, that excites me. That excites me because I am looking at the woman you are today, the choices you've made around what you are doing with your work and your business. And I'm hearing parallels between, I'm going to use what I have, but I'm going to be conscious around how I'm using it and how it's impacting those around me. So I'd like for you to move to us, to shift with us on the narrative of Clara today. I love what you brought onto the table about who you were, how you were doing it, how it was influencing what you were thinking you were going to be. Touch on the mother with four kids. That was what you were imagining, right? So now you're sitting in that future. You're sitting in that reality of what you had envisaged while you were younger. What's today's story? What's today's reality? And how is that different from A, what you'd expected, but also how you're experiencing it? And in terms of your imagination and the truth, what's what's caused that difference to exist?
Right. The reality now and what I envisaged are quite similar and at the same time quite different. So right now I have only one child. Interestingly, yes, I never thought, but circumstances are I have one and I'm very satisfied and happy. I envisaged a life, like I said, where you would be or I would be influential. And I think that in my way, I am being. And it's intentional effort to be. In my previous career, when I was in corporate, I have always been female focused. And I think it stems from the fact that my mother was involved with a lot of women groups. She was an educationist, but she loved to support women in diverse ways. I guess that is where mine stems from. I saw her working with marginalized women, for women, supporting them, and all of that. So looking back, I think that's where my focus or my driving force towards women stems from. When I was corporate, I used to do a lot of women in IT, women in entrepreneurship, leveraging on ICT, girls in coding, girls in ICT, and all of that. It was a conscious effort to move from that sector and do something else that will be touching the lives of marginalized women. And that's what took me to sustainable fashion, where we are very conscious of what we do by employing 75% of our workers are marginalized women. And we have 2% reserved for persons living with disability. Now, in reality or in my imagination, I never thought that I had inclusivity in mind at any point. I did not think that I was going to grow up and consider persons living with disability at my workplace, not because I did not have feelings towards them or I did not recognize them, but it never occurred to me because it was not part of the storytelling about how persons living with disability needed to be included. It was not a conscious, and this is the effect of storytelling. It was not inclusive. In our stories around Kwekwa Nancy or around all the folklores, I did not hear anything about a lame, blind, deaf, or any person around those stories. I mean, no. And so, yes, the reality and the imagination are different because now the narrative have changed where we're making conscious effort to support persons living with disability. I've also realized that, yes, what we think life is, there is always a G factor. I'm a Christian and the Bible makes me believe that, man proposes and God disposes. There's so many things that we take for granted and we think that by virtue of the kind of school we went to, but by virtue of our background or by virtue of what we are studying in school, this is how life has to present to us. And that life owes us this and that. Life owes you nothing, I have come to realize. And that everything that you want in life, you need to be very, very intentional about it. You need to learn to live with people, irrespective of who you are, whether your temperament, how different you are. As a multipotentialite, we tend to be quite complex. We are not easy to, as it were, understand. But you would begin to know that no man is an island and you live in a society and people are watching you, people are taking inspiration from you, and you need to be a model. And so you learn human interaction in a way that would help you grow and help others grow. Growing up, I envisaged a very bubbly adult doing whatever you like because, you are not too accountable to you are an adult, so you be accountable to yourself and all of that. I realized right now that I'm not accountable to myself only. I'm accountable to my son as well, as much as he is accountable to me. I'm accountable to my parents. My mom is still alive. Yes, I do not have to do anything that will drag her name in disrepute. It's very, very important. You have a family name to protect. You have that of your own and even your brand to protect. And so, yes, the narrative of what I was envisaging and what life truly is quite similar, but also quite different. I have learned that network is very, very important and building a very good network, which serves as your net worth. You should be able to tap into your network for use. So what kind of people are you around surrounding yourself with? I've learned what to feed your mind on. Garbage in, garbage out. What are you reading? I've learned to love yourself. There is a thin line between loving yourself and worshiping yourself. When you love yourself, you live literally like you live an out of body experience. You sort of have to step out of your body and look at your body and yourself and critique your own self. Not what others will say, what you would tell yourself. But that thin line is when you're worshiping yourself. You feel that whatever you are doing, no matter what people say, you do not care. If you love yourself, you care at a certain point what people will say about you. Not everything should matter, but you must listen and look and see, is it true or false? If it's true, it is important and is imperative that you do something about it because you're supposed to grow. Growth is equivalent to quality, maturity. And every day as we're growing, these are some of the things that we need to check. We grow in self-love as well. And so you should be measuring your growth in relation to your self-love.
Now you see why I want to just record you and just sit and listen and drink in the wisdom. You've taken us on a whole journey. You've taken us on a whole journey of consciousness, of deliberate intentionality. You are reminding us that even as we exist as storytellers, the gift of effective storytelling comes with effective listening and being aware of your surroundings, being able to discern the quality of the messaging. Loved the listen, look, see. I will always say what I love. I'm walking through life with a lens of love. Oh, I love this. I love that. Because it resonates and it connects with either it connects with my own perspective or it stimulates me to think a little bit deeper. And so for me, you actually gave us a masterclass on what to double click on as you become more conscious of yourself as a story consumer, but also storyteller. And you juxtapose those two actually move between them quite seamlessly, reminding us, you started off with telling us the fact that your story changed. What you expected didn't end up the same. And so reminding us that narrative is not constant. It might be consistent in terms of things playing out, but allow narrative to unfold, and that the scenario or the journey may not be just linear. I guess the idea that what you had envisaged one day, being prepared as an individual to walk a path that's different from what you'd intended, but also to be fully present in the same path, because that's where you are, right? And so that idea of narrative changing over time stimulated for me the idea of being conscious and present in all of those changes that happen over time, and the gloriousness of it all. Because if you only focus on, I want it that way, you actually forget to walk the path. You're reminding me about the power of our mothers as chief storytellers and key storytellers, who evidence narrative not by what they say, by what they do. And you've said it twice in two different ways, narrating right at the beginning the role of your mom, but you also said it twice in narrating this part, in terms of the significance of her being what she's about. So being what she's about and engaging with community, with other women, appreciating that her life's mission and work and journey was with women, identifying my life's purpose, tells us that as storyteller and as leader, direction setting is what we do, but it's what we manifest in how we are. And I think that for me reminds us as storytellers to appreciate how we are living story, not how we are telling story, how we're living story. And that's what you brought to the fore around your mom. You tell that, and I'm going to back and forth because I love engaging with narrative, not as a static or linear construct, but I literally end up with light bulbs going off for me. And I hope that for those listening, the same experience comes in, because the metaphors exist in many elements of the tale that is told. When you spoke of your mom and saying that my mother's alive, I exist, one for my mother and my son, you use the word, what's the words that I sat here? And actually, I think I sat back when you said that, managing her brand. You're not here to disappoint her brand. In modern terms, we use some of these terms as if they are new, as if it's not something we start from home. Any child knows that your family name and your family identity is the nexus of the place of safety and comfort and belonging, right? And so if you are going to be working on yourself or with other people, that is your notion, that is your determination of how you see a brand. And we work with these. So I'm using that specifically because we love bringing up things like brand management and let me go and that's my brand. It starts at home. It starts with the stories that you're telling us. And so those nuances of what is important, what is the values associated with it, what does a brand look like? Your mother evidenced what your brand proposition was, which is not just around service, but being conscious and adding value to the places that you are occupying. That was her brand promise, right? And I'm hearing you translating that and saying, I have taken that and I've added to it. And my brand promise is not to let the brand down and to be consistent in my experience of it, in my transacting of it, and in my representing it. So stories allow us to draw parallels of perhaps not so obvious notions that again allows us to take our home. And when I use home, I'm also using that as a metaphor because through the story, I'm able to use your experience and share how, think about some of your social cultural practices, behaviors, and norms, and how actually the world of work and the narrative and languaging of it, and perhaps I'm going to use the word English, but it's in any other language. But the world of work transacts in a particular language. And when we codify that language, we're all able to understand it in the same way. And this is an invitation for us to sit back and start reflecting on how we are codifying the languages that we grew up with, the practices that we grew up with. We speak about culture. Those cultures are defined because of the ritualistic practice, because of the habits of bringing certain things to the fore, the elevation of right and wrong, the elevation of acceptable, not acceptable, the elevation of what you want to strive for. That's culture. So when we go into the world of work, we're actually not sitting divorced from these principles. We are actually sitting back and we've got our own way. And I think for me, the invitation is to think about how some of these practices are inculcated in your own homes and in your own families and how they show up, and use that as the bridge to reflect on how could I use this in the world of work, as opposed to I'm leaving my practices at home and I'm going to try and adapt new ones because they're written in some book review. They don't exist. The knowledge and the innate I guess it is the acumen of some of the African practices have got so much relevance in the world of business. And I'm thanking you for allowing this conversation to elevate that, right? Reminding us that, man's promise, God, what is it? Man promises, God,
Man proposes, God disposes. I mean,
man
it's not
proposes.
what you think that what really manifests. God has a determining factor, the final say in all that you think you will do.
But I connected that in saying that, I guess for me it's also linked to the idea of your narrative shifting and changing over time, is that there are circumstances that are out of your control. And in any environment that
Absolutely.
you're in, there are actors, agents who've got perhaps greater control over circumstances. You're not always going to be sitting in that seat of power, and sometimes you are ceding to power. That speaks to me to the existence and the occurrence of authority and power in institutions, and appreciating that there's time to lead, there's a time to be silent, there's a time to follow, there's a time to let what is happening around you actually take more significance than what you might be designing and wiring for yourself. There's narrative in almost everything that we say. And I think that in walking this journey of where you're at today, you've given us the gift of unpacking not where you are and what you were imagining, but the thought processes and what you've elevated in consciousness around that journey that you've walked. Oh, why would you tell the stories that you are telling now? What's so important about the stories? And perhaps tell me, perhaps, what is the one story? People ask you, just tell me a story about yourself. What is the story that you elevate for people's engagement? And why that story?
Well, the story that I elevate, it's my exit or transition from corporate to entrepreneurship. And I come across many people all the time who desire to do it, but are a little skeptical or afraid and don't know how to go about it. That's one. Then the second one is about how to build a successful brand locally to international recognition within what they term a very short time, though it's been 8 years. So the story that I normally tell people is there is no wasting time in corporate. Studying or being under leadership as, allow me to use the word, a servant. You learn so much how to take instructions. You learn how to be managed so that you can manage. And I tell new entrepreneurs that you need to have some taste of corporate to be able to be very successful in entrepreneurship. Especially now the social media makes entrepreneurship look very attractive. A whole lot of people are rushing into entrepreneurship simply because they have a skill to produce something. Ability to produce something nice or something useful does not make you an entrepreneur. That is why we have creative directors in companies. Being an entrepreneur is a whole ball game that not everybody is supposed to be. So yes, you may desire to be leaving corporate, but are you ready for entrepreneurship? Because in this journey, you are the last one to be considered. You take care of your suppliers, your workers, everybody, and you are the last. And the discipline that you need to bring on board in entrepreneurship, and most importantly, the network that you need to build a successful brand. I acquired all of that from corporate. And so there is a direct success to my entrepreneurship journey and my corporate experience. For instance, I build my own website, I handle all my social media, and I do that with joy. It's literally almost like me speaking. I don't struggle to do that. Whereas if you don't have the flair for this, is because I'm an IT professional. I've worked as an IT consultant for decades, and these are just the tidbits of the thing that I can do. It's almost like me doing something on WhatsApp. It doesn't take anything from me. You understand? Meanwhile, you may have to hire someone to do that. I have an idea of what financial management is. And so, yes, we do not have a permanent accountant. Our accountant is outsourced, but I'm able to run through the numbers quickly to know that, yes, this is in place or this is off. So the story I tell people is, yes, it's good to follow your passion, but to succeed, you would have to go beyond passion. Passion will only take you to what you love doing. But to succeed, you would have to face some of your fears. If you do not like mathematics, but you love fashion and you can sew, and you take the journey of entrepreneurship in fashion, remember you are going to face your accountant management. And as a good leader or as a good owner of the brand, you need to face your fear of mathematics and learn some financial management. And so, yes, you followed your passion of fashion, but you face your fears of mathematics in financial management to be able to be successful. So passion alone is not enough. You need more than passion to succeed in your business as an entrepreneur.
I'm chuckling to myself. I'm chuckling to myself because where were you when I started my business 20 years ago? You touch on narratives existing and prevailing that shape how we look at things, and quite importantly, what are some of the narratives that we're seeing dominating the floor? And some of the narratives are really around start your own business. It's easy, the digital era means that there are many ways of making money quickly. It's actually typically boils down to make money quickly. And what you're highlighting is that there are realities around, I guess, being in business. And if you have bought into, so your caution and your directive or direction comes to those who've bought into the idea that I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And your caution that you're sharing is that there's a lot more to it than perhaps what the stories share. And again, I'm linking this to what you said earlier on. You said that, in doing what you do, what part of the reality was that the narrative didn't exist for what you're doing. And the absence of that narrative, again, they say opportunity, entrepreneurs will seek what doesn't exist, and that is the gap. And that's what you decided to do, right? And you walked into that. What you're sharing is that narratives are not complete. The narratives that we are consuming are not complete. What you're sharing is that there's agency in the ability to shift and to change that narrative. What you're cautioning is there is a prevailing narrative around entrepreneurship. Go into it, you must. Here are the incentives to go in, which is great because it provides a starting point. But the caution is not everybody, it's not for everybody. So there's a certain level of discernment. And if I go back to what your listen, look, see, apply that discernment, use your own lessons, apply that discernment with any of the narratives that are being thrown or that are abundantly available. And in using that discernment, appreciate, and these are wisdom words that you're sharing around what you've identified. Appreciate that, and I'm gonna use the idea of corporate as a metaphor for organization and places of service, because I think for me that's what it translates to. Because they have been existing over a period of time, what they've been able to create is the systems, a systemic way of approaching things. They've been able to navigate the human interaction of behavior and relationships and the ability to get things done through and with other people. And they've been able to streamline the things that need to be done so that they happen effectively. So people, process, system as a very simplistic outlook of what you're exposed to. But you're also exposed to accountability. loved earlier on, you had said that one of the lessons for you being an entrepreneur or growing up, you'd imagine I'm going to be an adult. And you learned this fundamental lesson that, I'm not, I thought I'm going to be my own boss, but actually I'm finding everybody else is the boss of me. I'm in service continuously. And you're highlighting the idea of service as actually being a human experience. And the consciousness that I'm hearing from that is the opportunity, if you are thinking of being that one who leads in an environment and leads it successfully, be in service in an environment that allows you to pick up the skills and competencies, and importantly, the networks, which also reflects on the kind of social capital, because business is not just about financial capital, the social capital that allows you to navigate the ecosystem and universe of doing work. And what you're landing for people is that, this requires discipline. Entrepreneurship is this, it is, whoa, when it's good, it's good. But it can humble you, right? What you're
Yes.
raising for people is, hold strong with the idea that your passion is not sufficient to walk you through the realities that the discipline will actually support you to navigate. Yeah. So those are
Yes.
the undercurrents of the narrative that you shared, but how I'm translating, oh, this is what I'm picking up. This is how I draw the links between what I'm perhaps taking lightly and what I perhaps need to pay a bit more attention to. And you've raised that for us, that ability to say, yeah, I'm saying this, but when you're listening to story, be curious. And I think you said that as a child, part of what you evidenced was your ability to be curious. And that's what I guess for all of us who aspire to do what doesn't exist or are even able to identify what is not there, is this idea of curiosity and willingness to be that one, to explore it. I was in church a long time ago, and I recall in that particular sermon, the priest actually said that, a lot of us walk around wondering what our purpose is. What's my purpose? And we ask each other and we ask other people, what am I here to do? And the gift of the message for me at that day, other people would, I guess, everybody receives the message and the gift to the extent that they're ready for it and to the extent that it resonates or makes sense in their world. And for me, what made sense was is that your pain, what you wake up with uncomfortable with, that is your purpose, because your life's journey will be about alleviating that discomfort. It will be about elevating or alleviating it or eliminating it, so that the intention of how it exists and persists is more in tune to how you wish it to be. And as you explore your purpose, you obviously will, the journey of navigation, you'll find different ways to coexist with this truth and reality. And I take that of the discipline, because you need to stay true to the course of your purpose and what it is that you'd like to see evident. And that's how your mark is left, right? That's how people get to interact
Absolutely.
with the value that you bring, is through these different, I guess, these different artifacts in different ways, whether they're physical or intangible. We leave people with gifts of who we are. And I guess that's the power of being the evidence of the story, as opposed to focusing on the speaking and the verbiage of that story. What is the story you want to leave people with? So as we think of you, I'm enjoying the fact that we typically talk about, tell me about your business. I don't know you, but I want to hear about how you think. And that's what I'm enjoying from these conversations. How does her mind work? What is she thinking about? And I would like to explore, and for you to share with us, what's the lasting story that you want people to be engaging with or to pay a bit more attention to? You have shared with us that the idea of entrepreneurship, that's the gift of the lessons that you've learned and what needs to be focused on. What are we not paying attention to that you think that these are the stories we need to be elevating? And this is why they're significant for us to elevate.
Well, I think what we need to be telling more is the stories of African women by African women in a manner that
Mm,
is not adulterated either by religion or by westernization.
mm,
Many a times you have the story of women being told by men, or the story of African being told by non-Africans. and it's not really the true story. It does not resonate with us. So I think there should be more storytelling around who the true African woman is by a true African woman. And our stories are powerful enough to help shape the world into a better place. I meet a lot of youth, both men, both boys and girls, who are thinking of leaving the continent for greener pastures and all of that. And it's always just sitting with them and speaking words of wisdom in a manner that they have overlooked into their lives, and then they become aware of their surroundings. You know, our words are very powerful, and most of them just join people saying it's difficult to be in our country, it's difficult to be in Africa, it's difficult to be in Ghana, it's difficult to be in South Africa. They join in a song being sung by some people, and they want to live it. And I tell you, creating your world with the words that come out of your mouth. As a man thinketh, so he is. That's what the Bible tells us. So you create your world. Listen, grass is green at your feet. And you need to know the environment that you are supposed to be in. It is very fertile here in Africa. We need to be conscious about that. We need to reset our thinking, our mindset. And that is where the storytelling by true African women, to be told by African women, should be around to help stabilize our continent in terms of business, in terms of farming, in terms of health, and everything else.
I cannot believe it's been almost an hour. I just cannot believe it's almost an hour because I'm sitting here and I'm wanting to engage with what you just said. But I also want to give the opportunity for those who have tuned online, if they'd like to also come into the chat, if they can just indicate if they do. You have said something so important, so close to my heart. I've got a child who's studying outside of the country, outside of the African continent. She is so determined to come home. She literally, every single day, she's like, I'm here to get an education, to get global exposure. You have mentioned, so for me, the story that you're leaving us with is the wealth and of our African youth. I think it's an undertold story, and the lens of the story is of particular interest to me. It boggles my mind as Africans that this is the continent that is financing, right? It's financing some of the world's best brains. This is where the fundamental schooling and education of our youth is happening. The story and narrative that's not being told is that it is once our youth have actually acquired critical skills of learning and practice that are actually honed and supported by our cultural practice, our social engagement practices, that we have actually, if you were to look at an entrepreneur, we are basically the breeding ground for that incubation. We are the incubators of the world's wealth. And we're incubators in the sense that we instill values. Those values are what makes our children such super achievers when they leave this continent. Those values are what shapes how they engage and interact with the world and are successful in environments where those things are working. I think it's an important narrative that we need to bring to the fore, that in terms of the world's population statistics, we have the youngest continent. So we are a fishing ground. We are fishing ground as Africans for the rest of the world to come in and essentially crop and take the cream. It's like tea harvesting, taking the tips of that have already gone through this process of development and nurturing, and then claiming success in those environments because we haven't been able to go that extra step of realizing the value of our investment in our children. That for me is a travesty. That's what I pick up from your story. And what I'm hearing you say further is don't be fooled by the narratives of the grass being greener on the other side. Sit down a little bit and start thinking with a different lens on the narrative you are consuming and perpetuating. If the rest of the world finds you so attractive, you are attractive. Now let's start working on the narratives that say, how do we as Africans mine this core talent? They used to take our gold and our diamonds. They're still doing that. But right now, they're taking our minds. And these minds are shaping and shifting the economies of the world. So we are missing out. The narrative that we must actually be appreciating is that we are missing out. It's like you've invested in this great annuity fund, and before it reaches maturity, you withdraw, and then you are penalized for withdrawing. And then the person who picks it up is the one who's actually leveraging. Oh, it's very successful. It's successful because it's been in incubation for 21 years.
Yes.
So I'm hearing you say that, you know, it is those who are able to infuse new stories that allow us to interact with those stories. The travesty is that the stories that we're telling of us, by us, are not being told by us, or for us rather, are not being told by us. And therefore, the content, I always say that the world library and directory of what being African looks like is not typically shaped by Africans. And so this opportunity, particularly in a digital era, allows us to change that, and to change it quickly, and to change it deliberately by consciously bringing in our voices, by focusing on the conversations we'd like to have in the way that we'd like to have them, not being channeled or directed by what we think the real world wants to interact with, but being very deliberate about framing them and understanding we're contributing to a global library of how we think, what we think. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the key around Abaxoxi, the storytellers, amplifying the voices of African women, but ensuring that we are at the helm and owning the content that firstly, we are imagining, and secondly, we are curating, and thirdly, we are distributing. So thank you so much for joining me. I will now open up. I see I've got a Shirley online. Shirley, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? It's been designed in this way so that it's not just a conversation between Clara and myself, but there is opportunity for any audience members. There is no pressure, so if you don't want to come on board, that's fine. Trust me, I can speak to Clara the whole day. um, so I'm saying that she's not necessarily, I'm going to assume that she is not necessarily going to come online, but I have enjoyed this conversation as I do with you several times. And you see, I'm making many excuses to be in your space before I come to Ghana. Something that's in my to-do for this year. Any last words or thought as we, close down today's session of storytelling? What it perhaps illuminated for you, or some thoughts that you're taking out just from having had a discussion and being in a space where this is the topic, usually allows me to think of things that, because I wasn't thinking of the topic, weren't top of mind. So, any last thoughts, Clara?
Yes, what I would like to close this session with is the fact that if you are an entrepreneur, remember that storytelling, it's great as far as marketing your brand, selling your services and products is concerned. So tell your story and tell it very well, because storytelling engages people's emotions and puts you high on the scale of acceptance and increases your brand visibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is Abaxoxi, the storytellers, this evening, joined by Clara Pinkrah-Sam. Have yourself a good evening. Thank you. Thank you. That's a wrap.